Hello. So the issue in my subject area that I want to discuss in this presentation is the issue of teaching difficult or controversial content to junior level students. In the beginning of this diploma, other student teachers and I engaged in a discussion surrounding this very particular topic. We all stated that we were nervous about doing this once we headed into practicum or in our own practice, because we didn't actually really understand how to go about this or whether it was actually appropriate for us to discuss controversial content to junior level students. So in this presentation, that is what I will unpack. So quick overview, is there any advantage in teaching controversial or difficult topics in junior level students? So what are the pros and cons essentially? In the context of social studies, the subject itself touches on topics such as human rights and social justice that can contain content that may be considered jarring or confronting for the given age group, or these students may disagree with our opinions, etc. So how do we go about teaching these topics without offending students, or how do we go about teaching these topics in an appropriate way for this age group? There's also the issue of social media. So what is social media's role in this issue? Social media exposes junior level students to a lot more content than we think, and some of this content can be very difficult, controversial to approach in the classroom. So how do we tackle that? Some key terms. So these two terms I will be using quite often in this presentation. The first one is controversial, and the definition is the subject of intense public argument, disagreement, or disapproval, e.g. their political opinion is controversial. The next term is subjective. So the definition is based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions. For example, his views are highly subjective. So how is this issue problematic? What we as educators may consider too advanced or controversial for junior level students to learn about, others may think otherwise. Other teachers may think otherwise. The students themselves may think otherwise. And so the issue lies in the fact that it is very subjective. What is considered appropriate, what is considered controversial is very subjective and is different for every type of person. So the issues that we think that are controversial may not be the same ones that create conflict amongst our students. Again, with social media, students are exposed to more subjects and controversial topics through the ever advancing, technology. And as educators, we must understand that the digital age has redefined what is and isn't appropriate for certain age groups, and that this can change how we go about teaching controversial topics. Some viewpoints. So what are advantages in teaching controversial subjects to junior level kids? Essentially, personally, I actually think it broadens a student's worldview regardless of age, because it exposes them to different perspectives surrounding difficult topics within social sciences. So we're allowing them to understand and acknowledge other worldviews, other perspectives from different people, from different walks of life. And I think that's really important, especially for the critical thinking skills and in developing their empathy as well. In a reading I read, there was a, what's it called? There was a little study surrounding controversial topics and teaching it in social studies. And it says that positive citizenship results were linked with giving students the chance to explore controversial issues in an open, supportive, and accommodating classroom environment. So students were showing positive citizenship results when they were able to talk about these things in the classroom, given that the classroom was a supportive and very open environment for students to discuss. So that's a good thing. That's an advantage, I think. Social studies courses that lacked discussion surrounding controversial issues had little or no effect on a student's political interest or inclination towards class participation. So when teachers were not discussing these controversial topics or lacked controversial topics in their content, students didn't really show much of an impact in their learning. There was no effect on their citizenship or political interest, and there was very little impact on their inclination to stay motivated and participate in class. So that is from Han, 1991. Another advantage, now this is an excerpt I took from a text. More reported exposure to controversial issues was associated with positive changes in attitudes in the form of increased levels of political interest, political confidence, and social integration. Students who recalled a wider range of views have been considered in their classrooms were more trusting in society, more socially integrated, more politically confident, more trusting of other students and school adults, more politically confident regarding school decision-making, and more interested in school-level politics. So what we can take away from this excerpt is that when students were able to tackle these controversial issues or topics in the classroom, a supportive classroom, then they became more integrated in their communities as well as within the school community. There was more, I think, motivation to participate in their communities, which I think is only an advantage. And this was from Solely 1996. Some disadvantages, though, there can be backlash from parents. Obviously, parents want to know what they'll be discussing in class, and they may be against the teaching of certain topics because it can go against the personal beliefs, religion. They may find it's just too inappropriate for a child of that age to learn. So that can be an issue. And, you know, as educators, you want to make sure that parents are happy with what we are teaching their kids. And this can be, I think, a little roadblock in this issue. But also some students themselves, they may not feel comfortable in discussing certain topics, and that can be due to trauma or issues in their personal lives, and that's just something that you know teenagers don't want to divulge to their whole classroom. So how do we go about teaching this without impacting so much on a student's comfort? Personally, I did have a situation in my year 10 social studies class when I was in high school where I felt very uncomfortable, and it was so uncomfortable to the point I did have to talk to my parents about it, where we were discussing so I went to a religious school. We were discussing Christianity's views on abortion, and that wasn't the problem. I was more than happy to learn about that and discuss that with my fellow classmates. But the issue that I had and what made me feel uncomfortable was that my social studies teacher was comparing abortion to the Holocaust. And I felt very uncomfortable with that comparison. I didn't think it was a fair comparison to make. And I was just not happy with the discussion in class that we were having surrounding this. And, you know, it just wasn't a very healthy environment to discuss this topic. And so that is a huge problem, and I've experienced it firsthand, and that can be a disadvantage in teaching controversial subjects at school. So here's some suggested approaches to the issue, some ways we can make our way around these disadvantages. Reflect on how such conversations might contribute to rather than detract from your overall learning goals for the course. So how does, for example, gender discrimination, how does that go towards or contribute towards our learning goals for the end of the year? That's an important question you must ask yourself before we get into it. It's also really important to test the waters with your students, because no matter what, a classroom full of 30+ kids, they're all very different, and what they find controversial or appropriate, inappropriate is different for all of them. So give students a chance to bring current topics of relevance or subjects that are on their minds to the class. And this can help us to see what students consider important or relevant events. In my first practicum, there was a situation where this happened. In social studies for year 10, we were discussing some human rights, and we're discussing discrimination. I personally was discussing gender and racial discrimination, and I tried to keep it as surface level as possible because I was terrified of, you know, making any controversial statements or making students uncomfortable. However, a few girls in the back actually raised their hands and they said, Miss Sarmiento, why don't we discuss intersectionality since we're talking about gender and racial discrimination? And I was taken aback a little bit because I didn't even think a child that age would know what intersectionality was, let alone want to discuss it in class with their peers. And I thought it was just really cool. And just goes to show that what we understand of these kids is very different. So yeah, give these students a chance to pick out what they want to talk about, current topics that are relevant to them. It will also help with motivation in the classroom so that they could be inclined to participate. And I think the third little point here is also the most important point. We have to leave our own personal agenda at the door when it comes to discussing controversial topics, because if students are curious about a topic that they find difficult to unpack or process, then it's our responsibility as educators to offer them multiple perspectives and outlets to explore this topic. So we can't come into the classroom and teach our own personal opinion. That actually will just hinder a student's learning in the long run. We won't be able to broaden their worldview. They won't have a chance to understand different perspectives. So it's important to leave our own agenda at the door. And we can offer them multiple perspectives and outlets to explore their topics through, for example, inquiry. So asking lots of questions, uncover what it is that they actually want to learn or what they need to understand. Critical thinking, so exploring text beyond surface level and being inquisitive readers, skeptical readers, always questioning. And most importantly, respecting different perspectives. So understanding and acknowledging different views, even if you disagree with it or not, I think that's really important. It can also help them learn to be more empathetic, as well as it also touches on critical thinking as well. So in terms of this topic, the problem or the issue that of teaching social sciences and teaching controversial subjects for junior level students, I think this is the most appropriate way to go about it. It will always be an issue as technology advances, as students' worldviews change, as society continues to change. It will be different how we approach it, but I think for the time being, this is the most appropriate way to go about it. Yeah, so this is just my references. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.